Month talk. Welcome all to the Big Butterfly Month talk series. Today's speaker is Dr. Krushnamegh Kunte. I don't think he really needs any introduction in this group, but if there is anyone who has not met or not interacted with him, um, Krushnamegh is a true butterfly and biodiversity lover. I know him close to about 30 years now, probably, and we have been to different locations watching butterflies and other insects, birds, everything. Excellent and knowledgeable company to be always. I always enjoy being with him. A little bit of his background. He grew up in Pune in Maharashtra and pursued his graduation there, did a lot of field work during that time itself and started publishing about butterflies and other stuff. Uh, he got to spend 1 year in the Madhumalai forest, and that's when I think his biodiversity uh, observation and curiosity kind of skyrocketed, and then he's been doing so much interesting and wonderful things. After that, he did his master's from Wildlife Institute of India and then pursued his PhD in University of Texas, Austin. And now he is a faculty at the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore. His lab is rightly called as the Biodiversity Lab, and he's been doing a lot of citizen science work since 20 years now, with trying to involve people from all walks of life into looking, observing, studying, and documenting biodiversity, mainly starting with butterflies. So I think that that introduction is more than enough. I will hand over to Krushnamegh to start off today's session.
Thanks, Vijay, for that generous introduction. Am I perfectly audible?
Yes.
This laptop has a tendency to lower my voice once in a while. So if that happens, just Arko or Vijay, can you please remind me or point it out to me so
Yes,
that I
definitely.
maybe make sure that the audio is okay. All right, it's good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here once again. I've been interacting with butterfly lovers and generally nature lovers all over India for almost 30 years now, slightly over 30 years, in fact. And it's always a pleasure to chat up about things that we love and do. There's a lot I can talk about butterflies. I've, of course, been reading up a lot ever since I got interested in butterflies. And as a scientist, I've read far and wide, but I've also discovered a lot of things through research that my lab does. One of the things that has been a long-term passion of mine is counting butterflies. And that was, in fact, one of the first things that I started doing when I started watching butterflies. So it's a particular pleasure to talk about that long-term hobby of mine. And it doesn't have to be even related to the kind of research that is going on in my lab at any moment. I just like taking down notes on how many butterflies I see, where I see them, and how I see them. So that it's just an old habit that will probably go with me. Um, and I've been counting butterflies for nearly 30 years now. My first project started in 1992. So that's almost exactly a year now. I mean, 30 years now. So the reason why I started counting butterflies was somewhat unusual. When I became interested in butterflies, this was around Pune. I was only in 12th grade, maybe early first year of college. So really early, I didn't have any guide. I didn't have any experts around me I could go to and ask about butterfly biology or butterfly identification. Some common species people around me knew, but very few of them. At that time, early 90s, almost nobody watched butterflies and knew about species identification or anything else. But as a young kid, I used to go out a lot and observe everything. I mean, absorb everything there was to see and observe in the field. And one of the things I noticed in the first few months after I started watching butterflies was that butterflies I had seen 3, 4 months ago were largely gone. And then a new set of butterflies had started appearing. And over a course of a few months, that pattern became really striking. And I'd been watching birds for a long time before that, long time meaning 4 or 5 years before that. I had never asked a question which was worth pursuing. I got into butterflies, and within a few months, I had an observation which was worth pursuing. And then I just asked around how to perhaps do counts. And I started figuring out a lot of things on my own. It wasn't, I mean, you can imagine a 12th grade first year student, not exactly, even now, not exactly the kind of student who can find a lot of resources. In my time, it was even harder because there's no internet. Imagine a time when there was no internet and there were no experts around. But I figured out a lot of things as a young student. And what I did turned out to be my first academic research paper. So as a young student, that was a big boost to my butterfly watching and also love of butterflies. And then that really helped me grow into a scientist, not just remain a butterfly watcher. So that was a big factor in turning me to a research field. So in some sense, counting butterflies is something that has turned me into a butterfly scientist rather than just a butterfly watcher. And that has also had a big impact on the kinds of things that we do now, and hopefully the kinds of things that you do now, because you have seen what sorts of patterns we can learn from the data that we collect. So to begin with, counting butterflies can be done in various ways. The most common method that is used in a lot of places in the world is transect method. In butterfly literature, in butterfly research, often it's called Pollard box because this butterfly scientist in the UK started taking counts in this manner. It's a slightly relaxed way of taking transects. So transects is an idea where you choose a line, ideally a straight line of a certain fixed length. Typically, people use 500 meters or 1 kilometer or more for all sorts of animals. You can use this for mammals, you can use this for birds, butterflies, dragonflies, anything really that you want to count. So you choose a line, linear distance, 5 to 1,000 meters, as I mentioned, and then you also fix a width around that line. So for example, you might say butterflies being small, I will count them only on 5 meters on either side. So 10-meter belt, 500 meters by 10-meter belt. And you will count all the butterflies in this particular area that you cover. And you will do this in multiple places in a forest or any habitat that you go to. We're capturing all the variation in that area, different habitats, different ups and downs in the terrain, and then maybe more shade, less shade, things like that. So basically, you try to replicate this particular belt transect in multiple habitats so that you cover some variation in the habitat and then variation in where butterflies occur. This is the basic idea of a belt transect. And this has been popular, especially with scientists, because it gives a sense of structure. There's a defined area and a defined time in which you count all the butterflies, and this has been used extensively. For a lot of scientists, though, in tropical areas such as mine, it became fairly clear early on that this method really doesn't work for most of the landscapes in which Indian butterfly ecologists or butterfly biologists and butterfly naturalists might want to go around. And the reason for this is that A, you can't maintain a straight line. I mean, imagine if you're taking a count in the Himalayas, find me a 500-meter line which is more or less straight. It's just not possible. Second thing, and this is a major one, because of which we have just completely abandoned this idea of taking a transect. line a belt transect and counting butterflies or anything else really. And that part is actually part of biology of butterflies, how they're clustered and how they uh, behave and their general activity patterns as well. So what happens is if you go to take a transect, among the assumptions that you're supposed to follow is constant pace of walking. So if you are walking 500 meters, for example, and covering it in half an hour, or whatever time that you define based on the habitat, you have to maintain that pace. You can't walk slowly when there are lots of butterflies or when you're not seeing butterflies to look for butterflies, and you can't go fast uh, when you have butterflies there. So then the assumption of uniform distribution of animals, or at least uniform pace of sampling animals, is violated. And the reason why I said this is a fundamental problem that a belt transect kind of a method cannot really deal with is because for those who have seen butterflies for some time, and especially for those who have gone to forests with lots of butterflies, you will see that butterflies are not uniformly distributed in a forest. There is much greater density along streams or along forest edges or along paths in the forest where there's more sunshine, perhaps flowering plants, or in case of streams, wet soil where butterflies like to settle down and then take nectar from nectar plants or salts and other nutrients from the wet soil. So when you get to a mud puddling spot, it's impossible that you'll be able to walk at a uniform pace. There may be a congregation where there may be 20 species, 30 species, and potentially as many as hundreds of individuals. So then you have to wait there, you have to count all the butterflies carefully, do your identification, take data before you move on. And if a particular habitat is not uh, that great for butterflies, you still can't violate that. So if you're taking a count in a grassland versus in an evergreen forest, if it's a 500-meter transect with 10-meter belt, you have to maintain the pace in a grassland as well as the evergreen forest. And if you have done butterfly watching in this kind of very different habitats, you will very quickly realize that you just cannot keep a uniform pace. You just cannot maintain the same distance in a certain time in a particular area. So essentially, you end up violating assumptions of the belt transect method, and therefore the data that you get is to some level not really usable because assumptions are not met. Second thing is that you just cannot finish a transect line in a good evergreen forest patch, for example. And among the examples that I like to really cite are things like if you've been to Baksa or Namdafa, you might decide that, oh, there's some mountain far away or some valley that you want to go to, and you may never reach there, especially in a place like Namdapha or Baksa, or even a good evergreen forest like, let's say, Thattikad Wildlife Sanctuary in South India, or any part of Coorg, for example. You will start walking and you will quickly realize how many butterflies there are, especially around nectar plants or mud puddling spots. And while you're counting them, your 500 meters you can forget about because you can't even go 100 meters sometimes in an hour or two or three sometimes. I remember many times, especially if you go to Namdapha or Baksa, on the first day, if you decide that you're going to walk 3 kilometers and you're going there for the first time, seeing butterflies for the first time, there is no way you're going to be able to go 3 kilometers because you're just going to spend time identifying butterflies in the first 100 meters where you are. And even for an experienced butterfly watcher like me or um, let's say Tarun or somebody else, Sanjay, Pranav, even for experienced butterfly watchers, it's impossible to very quickly count butterflies, note them down, and then move on so that you can maintain that pace and cover that distance. And I tried really hard to do this during my master's. That was the first time, actually the second time. The first time was the project in Pune that I did, and that was 92, 93. After that, I tried really hard to do this as part of my master's project in WI, and I just could not do 500-meter counts simply because all these things that I mentioned, the problems with maintaining a proper pace and covering the distance just wasn't going to work out. So since then, I started thinking, how can we tackle this problem? And very quickly, I realized that set distance is as a measure of unit uh, for sampling isn't a good idea in a place like India or any kind of complex habitat, any tropical area you go to, unless you are in a very plain meadow in the UK, which is where a lot of these methods were developed or used extensively, or you're in a place like, let's say, Bandipur National Park, counting spotted deer or elephants, you're not really going to be able to do a transect count, especially for things like insects, butterflies, even birds. It's impossible to do that. So then I came up with this idea, not completely original. A lot of people have done time constraint counts in the past, but I came up with this idea of completely replacing belt transects with time constraint counts. What do time constraint counts mean? Time constraint, in the name, you will see that instead of constraining the distance, in other words, defining an area, length, and then width. Um, so the area is the unit of measurement. Here, the unit of measurement is going to be time. So your unit of measurement is constrained by the amount of time that you spend counting butterflies. And we tried 1 hour counts, 3 hour counts. People still are trying to do various lengths. But after a lot of trial and error, and then things like considerations like, if you're in a big continuous forest or some other habitat, you can probably do a 3 hour count, no problem. But often habitats don't remain the same. If you walk in a landscape for some distance in a place like India, any kind of area you can pick up, the habitat keeps on changing, and there's no way to note down exactly what kind of habitat you have around you. On the other hand, if you make it just 5 minutes, in 5 minutes, typically on average, you're not going to see enough butterflies that a 5 minute count is going to give you enough sample, enough number of individuals in your count. And then most of the counts are going to end up being zero or having really, really low diversity, that they're not going to be particularly productive from statistical point of view. So with a lot of trial and error, I realized that an hour or more was just too long, and anything shorter than 30 minutes was just too short. So we settled on 30 minutes. And since 2007, 2008, I've been taking 30-minute counts. I've probably counted, I don't know, maybe more than 50, 60,000 butterflies just in the Northeast on several trips that I did. This was early 2007, 8, 9, which was when I did my initial trips, when I was just doing all these counts. And when I joined NCBS back in 2012, there was a chance meeting with Rohit Girotra, who was, this is an interesting story. You want to sit up and listen. So Rohit was a corporate guy. He was not a naturalist, or not a big naturalist. He was a naturalist, of course, but not a big naturalist, didn't have too many years of experience, hadn't done any research, hadn't known any scientists really at that time. He found a small butterfly in Bangalore he couldn't identify. So he asked S. Karthikeyan, our common friend, about that butterfly, and Karthikeyan didn't know that butterfly either. So he asked Rohit to contact me, and I had just, I mean, it was just 2, 3 months after I joined NCBS. So Rohit wrote to me, sent me a picture of that butterfly, and it turned out to be Cephalus acale, the palm dart, and I mean palm bob, and nobody had seen that butterfly in Bangalore at that time. And a few years earlier, several people had started to see this in the Western Ghats, in Kerala especially. So this was a new butterfly for Karnataka, a new butterfly for Bangalore, and this chance meeting led us to a conversation about doing something more serious. Because I was meeting people at that time for the last several years before this meeting, I had been trying to get people to start some serious projects. So I was talking to Rohit. I said, why don't you just start counting butterflies using this 30-minute method that we had been using for some time, instead of just making daily checklists, which is what everybody did. Now with daily checklists, you can't really do any statistical analysis. I mean, you can try to squeeze something into some statistical framework and do some analysis, but it really does not give you the same statistical power, scientific power to squeeze out patterns of whatever you want to study. It could be distribution of species in space, but it could also be distribution of butterflies, animals in time. So if you do these 30-minute counts over a longer period, you can see what the trends are in butterfly populations. And then there was again some back and forth about how frequently should you do this? Should you really be doing it every single day? And we realized that doing it every day in the same place is not going to help, because a lot of butterflies are territorial or they don't travel around too much. So if you're going into the same area every day or frequently enough, you're going to be counting the same butterflies again and again. So if you want to avoid counting the same butterflies again and again, which is just going to do what we call false replication, meaning that you have the same population, but you're counting it again and again, but you don't know what the turnover is. So if you're counting butterflies every single day and don't know the turnover of individuals in that population, you're going to count some individuals a lot more than you're going to count other individuals. And this false replication creates tremendous problems for any statistical analysis and reliability of data. If you cannot rely on your data, on the quality of your data, then you better not even do that research, because you're just wasting your time. Or worse, you're coming up with patterns which are not even real. So if you want to use counting of butterflies as a method to get data that are going to be used to understand something about the biology of butterflies, or if you're going to use those data to, let's say, inform conservation policy, then it's going to be disastrous to use data which are not good. So the second insight that we had, apart from defining time unit as 30 minutes, was to define frequency at which we were going to start counting. And the frequency that we finally thought of was 2 weeks. The logic behind weeks is that most butterflies don't live for 2 weeks in the field. There will be a few butterflies which may live longer, especially in slightly colder areas where there may not be too many predators, or butterflies may remain dormant for long periods during the day, remaining active only for a short while. And therefore, the chances of them getting discovered and eaten by predators are a little bit on the lower side. On the other hand, in tropical areas, there's so many spiders and birds and lizards and all sorts of animals which are going to catch and eat butterflies, that it's very rare to see something which lives longer than 2 weeks, especially in the field. Even in the lab, we have a greenhouse where we breed butterflies, and even there, the lifespan of butterflies is not very long. A butterfly like, let's say, common Mormon, which is a reasonably large butterfly as butterfly sizes go, the average lifespan of that butterfly is less than 2 weeks. The oldest butterflies I've seen of common Mormon kept in captivity with unlimited food and no predators was, I think, something like 45 or 49 days. But that's extreme. We don't expect things to be so comfortable for butterflies or any organisms in the field. They are going to get eaten, they are going to get trampled, they are going to somehow die. They're going to get infected, become sick, and die. So almost nothing lives for longer than 2 weeks in a tropical area or subtropical area like India. But 2 weeks is not so long that a generation that you have counted, individuals that you have counted in the last count, have already bred, and that generation is also dead, and then you're getting the second generation. So 15 days was this sweet spot where the likelihood of recounting butterflies, counting the same butterfly in two consecutive um 2 week counts, which are 2 weeks apart, that probability is really, really small. And then that interval is not so long that you're going to miss any generations, or it's not going to be so small that you're going to miss single brood species, like, let's say, the what was known as banded tit, or rather, it is still known as banded tit. The fact that it was known only from a single generation in March is not true anymore now. We know that there's a smaller peak in September as well. I think 2, 3 years ago, somebody saw this butterfly in September or October, I forget. in Namdafa, but the major flight period for this butterfly is March. And even in March, it occurs only for 2 to 3 weeks, not longer than that. So for species which fly for a very, very short time, again, this is a little bit strange. Why would a, a butterfly which occurs in the tropics and just barely makes it into eastern Himalaya would have such a short flight period? It doesn't make sense. If you go to higher elevations, for example, Ladakh, and in the background, what I've done is I've put up a picture of a landscape from Ladakh where I was last month. So in places like this, some species are active only for a maximum of 1 month. So between mid-July and mid-August, they come out of the pupae, they fly around, mate, lay eggs, and then die. So if you want to capture these very short living butterflies, then 15 days is still frequent enough that you're not going to miss any flight, any flight period of a butterfly. So these two things were fixed with some trial and error. And now that this method has been working really well, this is what we would like to continue. Now, the success of this method is really stunning. So after Rohit started counting butterflies back in 2012, we have now finished 9.5 years by now, and we are in our 10th year, and the last count was just last Sunday. So in this one place where we have been counting butterflies in Bangalore, we have nearly 10 years of data, and that is phenomenal. The only counts that we missed was unfortunately because of some family situation. I think one time or perhaps two times Rohit missed a count. And then through the pandemic last year, we have missed some counts until I think May or June this year, when the lockdowns were still in effect. Outside of that, we have counted, and when I say we, I mean the whole group which goes out for counting. So it started with Rohit and a few, very few people, but then a lot of other people have joined, and there are people who go there almost every other weekend rather, and count butterflies. So it's this big group. You can call it Bangalore Butterfly Club. You can call it Indian Foundation for Butterflies. You can count it whatever else you like. In Bangalore, we have also been counting butterflies on NCBS campus, by the way. So these different places are being covered in Bangalore for so many years. And we have counted in Doresanaripalya itself, probably close to 100,000 butterflies, 1 lakh butterflies. So this is data over nearly 10 years, nearly 1 lakh butterflies. And Bangalore is not particularly biodiverse. In terms of butterfly diversity, we have 179 species recorded, out of which about 125 species we reasonably expect to see every year. These are common and rare, common to rare species, but they're not so rare that we won't see them in a particular year. Yeah, the rest of the butterflies, you see them once in a few years, or there are historical records such as cabbage white, which has been recorded in Bangalore a long time ago, which probably came with some cultivated cabbages from Ooty or somewhere. Yeah, but it's not a butterfly which you will expect in Bangalore, and nobody I know has seen it in Bangalore in the last not just 10 years, but probably 50, 60, 70 years. So we have these butterflies, let's say 125 or so, which we can reasonably expect to see every year. So for these 125 butterfly species, we have nearly 100,000 observations. And of course, for common species such as lemon emigrant or let's say plain tiger, we have a few thousand observations. For less common species such as, let's say, red admiral, which is seen only once in a while, we have probably less than a handful of observations. Yeah, so we have a wide range of numbers for these butterflies. But for common species, plain tiger, common Mormon, Indian common crow, and then Indian Nawab or Indian Jezebel, we have lots and lots and lots of numbers. Enough that we can do what we call time series analysis. Time series analysis is a method which looks at the weather patterns temperature, humidity, moisture, for example. I mean, temperature, humidity, and rainfall, for example. And then you can correlate that with butterfly numbers. Or if it's models versus mimics, you can look at their population dynamics and understand something about how these butterflies affect each other's populations if they do. And these are sorts of questions which Viraj is actually addressing right now. Viraj is a PhD student in my lab and an active member of this group which monitors butterflies in Bangalore, and he has been doing it for about 2 years. Some have joined recently, and Rohit has been doing it for 10 years. So it's a fairly good group in terms of age structure as well as interest and expertise of people who do this. So 10 years of effort, this is what we have achieved by just doing this doggedly month after month and year after year. And we have wonderful patterns that we have figured out from all of this. In 2015-16, Rohit started worrying that maybe the number of butterflies was going down in Bangalore. And reporters started calling me saying, we heard that butterfly numbers are going down. Can you tell us about it? So that they wanted to write newspaper articles about this. And from the beginning, I kept saying, please don't publish this story saying that butterfly numbers are going down. They may very well be going down. We don't know, but we also do not know that they are going down. Yeah. And the reason I said is that in UK, for example, where butterflies have been monitored for nearly 40 years, we do know that butterfly numbers go up and down with time over years and perhaps over decades. And some butterfly population changes have been described in fair detail. If habitats are disturbed a lot or they vanish, then of course butterfly numbers have plummeted. And butterfly species which occur in more disturbed areas, their numbers have gone up because disturbance has gone up. So some biology has explained why some species have gone up or gone down in their total population size. But for a large proportion of butterfly species, even with 40-year data, there are no clear answers to why their numbers have gone up and down. And in some sense, for conserving species or conserving habitats, it doesn't matter whether we can exactly tell why their numbers are going up or down. As long as we know that there is a habitat problem, habitats are being disturbed or completely destroyed, you can at least use the data to show that butterfly numbers have gone down. So what it really does is it shows you long-term trends that from which you can take informed decisions. Now, in case of Bangalore, what happened was I kept saying, just look around and see what happens in time. Don't make statements about whether butterfly numbers are going down because of climate change or because of habitat changes. And people always want to talk about conservation, which is a good thing, but you should also talk about conservation with which is based on some information. We shouldn't have a knee-jerk reaction to the patterns that we see. And here's a great example of why we shouldn't do that. So for 3 years in a row, butterfly numbers kept going down. Yeah, year after year. Every year there were fewer number of butterflies recorded and fewer number of species recorded. Both the numbers were going down. And that was alarming to a lot of people. In 2018, certainly the butterfly numbers shot up like those were the record numbers. Since 2012, when we started counting butterflies in Bangalore, we had never seen butterflies in this big numbers. And both those numbers increased. Number of individuals that we recorded and number of species that we recorded. And both numbers were like 7,000 versus 12,000 individual butterflies in a year, that kind of difference. It's not just a few dozen or few hundred individuals here or there. 7,000 versus 12,000, that's, 70-80% increase in numbers. That is phenomenal. And those numbers kept on rising. 2018 was really good. 2020 was even better. And at least the trend in 2020 was again on the rise compared to previous years in the same months. And then we realized what had happened was 2015, 16, 17, really bad rainfall. Rainfall was much more chaotic, and then rainfall was much lower compared to what Bangalore is supposed to get. So what we then realized is that perhaps these population fluctuations in these 5 6 years were much more of an effect of unpredictable rainfall and bad rainfall versus more predictable rainfall, more uniformly distributed showers, and of course lots of showers, so that we had pretty good rains. So much more vegetation, everything grew really well. More vegetation meant more caterpillars and therefore more butterflies, things like that. Now, unfortunately, in 2020, we were not able to continue this because of the pandemic and lockdowns. And in 21 as well, until May, June, we were not really able to continue with counting. But at least we will see what the numbers are like. And I suspect that the numbers are going to go up because even last year and this year, rains have been fairly good, at least in Bangalore area. I don't know about other areas. So all of this experience has told us that you really need good data to make any statements about butterfly numbers, whether population numbers are going up or down, whether butterflies are shifting in their range, things like that. And the only reason why we know that butterflies are affected by climate change and all sorts of things is because in places like the UK, people have been counting butterflies for a long time. And I won't say people meaning as a society, people have been doing it. A few people have been counting butterflies, but then they've been counting very seriously for a very long time and with complete dedication that only people like Rohit and others have shown in this group. Imagine for a corporate guy with a high powered job like that, this man still made a commitment to go every 2 weeks and count butterflies in one place. This is commitment and dedication to a level which is hands down remarkable, and this is the kind of dedication we really need to inculcate among butterfly watchers in India. So our Bangalore experience has been fantastic as a research uh, data set or data set which can be used for research. This is a phenomenal data set. I do not know any PhD student or anybody else except exceptional individuals like Rohit in academia who have collected data sets like this. It's just mind blowing what this kind of work can do. And certainly, I don't know any PhD student who has collected this kind of a data set. So I would say, in terms of research publication level data, this is really the best data set you can find. Uh, Probably not just in India, anywhere in the world outside of these few countries where butterfly monitoring has been going on. So what I would really like to see now is this Bangalore experience replicated over the entire country. And this is what we have been trying to build up towards uh, doing through activities like Big Butterfly Month. So just wait for a few more weeks and we'll put out something about methods to do this, to scale it up, and so on and so forth. But we really need people to dedicate themselves to this kind of work, saying that this is important, we want to do this, and there has to be a scientific vision behind why we are doing it, how we are going to collect data, how we are going to analyze data, what sort of patterns we are going to look for, and there has to be advanced thinking enough that you can actually use the data. If you don't think enough, if you don't plan enough, then all the work that you will do is going to more or less go waste. So what we would like to do now is, I've already given you information on why we are doing this. I'll give you a little bit more information on how we do it. And I will do it much more tomorrow when we are in the field than I will do it today. Yeah. But what I want to see now is students especially, or young researchers or young naturalists who will commit to counting butterflies in their area, commit to doing it for a long term, not just 1 month, not just 1 year, not just 5 years. I want to see people commit to doing this for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, all their life. We need to find groups which will do this. And of course, it's more difficult for one person. But if we do this as a group, as we have done for Bangalore Butterfly Club, and I hope that the Delhi group will replicate this, the Pune group will replicate this, Sharan's group in Tamil Nadu will replicate this. We want as many people from as many places come together, form a group, and then do this as a group activity where even if somebody doesn't have time 1 week, when you want to do count, somebody else will go and cover from the same group who knows the trail and who knows butterflies in the area and how this is done. So that kind of network is the key. So if you're interested in doing this, please drop me an email and we should start putting this together. And then the second thing that we would like to do is train these people really well so that they're doing the 30-minute counts in a manner which is consistent with what we have done all over India through our fieldwork since 2007, and especially in Bangalore since 2012. And that's a much more systematic effort to do these things, which has succeeded really well. So that's overall why we should do this and what we will gain from doing this. And I will tell you, Forest Department will be very happy to see this sorts of things. Forest Department has already been very happy with what we have done at Doris Nepalla. And in fact, I remember several months ago, the APCCF called me. This is a high-ranking official in Karnataka state. And he said, why you people not coming and counting butterflies? You have done this for 9 years. Why are you not doing it right now? And we explained to him that because of the COVID restrictions, we couldn't really. I think in Bangalore we could travel only until 9 o'clock in the morning. After that, everything was supposed to have been closed, and people were not supposed to have been on the street. So people could not really start butterfly counts, finish them, and then go home. So we said we really can't do this. So unless we get a letter saying that we are allowed to do this at the request of a government agency, we couldn't really do it. So it didn't work out. But the fact is that forest officers were asking us, we like what you're doing here. Why are you not doing it? Please do it. And the Butterflies of Bengaluru book, if you haven't seen it, go online. There are several, I think, two online bookstores which are selling it. On I Found Butterflies, there's a link to online stores where you can buy it, or contact details of people who will ship the book to you. So get a copy. It's a very nice book, and especially for most Indian cities, that book pretty much covers all the species that you will see in your town or city. So it will help you with butterfly identification, with information on those species. And there's a lot of information on lavolose plants and nectar plants as well. So get that book. And that book was completely bankrolled by Forest Department. And they also purchased 500 copies of this book. This is the kind of a rapport we have been able to build with the Forest Department by doing this. So if you want to do some research, which is going to have conservation implications, if you want to do an outreach activity, which is going to be perceived as something very good, far and wide. I mean, find any school kid or college kid uh, uh, or a teacher, and they're going to be super happy to do this. So for outreach as well, this has tremendous power of attracting people and engaging people. So I think we should really do this, but we should do it in a systematic manner, which is scientifically sound, which has very solid scientific background and a scientific vision of where we want to go. So drop me an email if you want to do this, and we will put something together in the next few weeks. All right, I will stop about the long-term vision of what we want to do and why we want to do. Very quickly, I'll mention how we take 30-minute counts, and it's already nearly 40 minutes since we started. So I'll start wrapping up the talk, and I'll take questions from you guys. So what we do is typically start early in the morning. If we are in Northeast, start at 7, 7:30, 8. If we are in Bangalore, we start a little bit late, 8 or 9, typically 9 o'clock, and then count butterflies until 1 or 2 o'clock, until it's time to go back and have our lunches. So that gives you a solid about I mean, not 9 to 1, let's say, that is 4 hours. But typically we do 5, 6 hours, especially when we are in the field somewhere far away, like let's say northeastern forest or somewhere in the Western Ghats. So what I will ask you to do when you're taking counts is, A, don't do them every day or too frequently that you're going to keep counting the same butterflies again and again. If you want to do more frequent counts, go to different areas and count butterflies so that you're not counting the same individuals. So we start at a certain time, fix a time, do it from 9 to 1. That's very convenient. You can have breakfast and then start. You don't have to wake up really early in the morning, and you don't have to eat your lunch really late. So it gives you pretty good solid 4 hours, meaning you can take 8 counts, 8 30-minute counts in that time. And in those 4 hours, don't take a break. Count butterflies from 9 to 1, do solid 8 counts. And in that time, what we typically do is at the beginning of the count, we note down date, time, the 30 minutes in which you're going to count butterflies, and then weather conditions. If it's breezy, say it's breezy. If it's very windy or no wind at all, mention that. If it's very sunny, note that down. So from the date and time and conditions, cloud conditions or sunny conditions, we'll be able to figure out roughly how good it was for butterflies. If you have any kind of weather instrument, if you have Kestrel or some other kind of weather instrument which will give you precise temperature, humidity, and other parameters, even better. If you have precise measurements, that's great for scientific rigor. That's even better in the long term. But we don't expect you to carry a thermometer or a hygrometer around that you will be able to measure all these climatic uh, conditions more precisely. But at least noting down that it was, so kinds of notes that I've noted down in the past is, let's say 9 o'clock in Namdafa, very hot and humid. If you want to be more descriptive, you can say that very hot and humid, so much that I can't even bear this temperature and humidity. Yeah. So we know approximately it's at least going to be 26, 27 degrees. Yeah. Nobody feels very sweaty and hot and humid and miserable below 25 degrees, right? So we know we are in that ballpark. And if you say extremely hot, you can perhaps even take weather prediction. A lot of mobile phones nowadays have some sort of a weather, have some sort of a temperature thing, or you can download it and use it, or you can look at exact weather prediction for that specific area if there's a weather station nearby. Do something so that you can get more precise measurements. But if not, don't worry about it. Saying that it is very hot and humid is good enough. Saying that there is a slight breeze versus very heavy winds, that kind of difference is good enough to mention. So mention all the weather conditions. Also note down how many people were there. If there's a single person, you're going to see fewer butterflies. If there are 2 or 3 really good butterfly watchers, you're going to see more butterflies. Very simple, very widespread experience of butterfly watching. So note down how many people are there, and especially if they're good butterfly watchers, who those people are, because identification is going to be affected by who's watching butterflies and how difficult butterfly identification is in a particular area. And of course, in Bangalore, butterfly identification is more easy compared to, let's say, in Thattekad or in Coorg or in Castle Rock area. Yeah. So note down size of the group, some at least prominent members of the group. If it's a smaller group, of course, you should write everybody's names. But if it's a very large group, at least write representatives, leaders of that group who are taking down data and looking at butterflies. Apart from that, you should also note down typical habitat conditions. In Doris Nepalya, for example, it's a woodland. It used to be much more of a plantation, but slowly a lot of wild native species have grown up, and now we know what the habitat looks like. In case of the Resinapallia, we have been taking pictures of that habitat for nearly 10 years now, so we actually know what the trails look like. So it's good to take pictures or even videos along your transect line when you're counting, so that there'll be a long-term record of what the habitat was like. And you don't have to do it every single month. You could perhaps do it once in several months so that you can capture how the habitat is changing. So there's a bunch of things that you can do to record conditions at that time, climate conditions as well as habitat conditions and observer conditions, so that you have a fairly good record of what has gone into making that 30-minute count, so that when people are analyzing your data, they can squeeze out information which may be relevant for understanding these population trends and then changes in any populations. Yeah. So once you note that down, what you do is, if you have chosen a path or any kind of a line along which you want to walk, just a moment, I'm going to drink some water. This is what happens if you keep talking for 50 minutes straight. Anyway, so what we do is we start walking along this path or whatever um, landscape feature that you have used, and on all sides we keep counting butterflies. So we start with, let's say, the first butterfly we see is common grass yellow. We say common grass yellow. After that, if there are two individuals, we say two. And then after 5 minutes, if I see a third common grass yellow, fourth common grass yellow, I just keep increasing that number. Okay. So you don't have to keep writing common grass yellow multiple times. You just make entry for a species. And in those 30 minutes, you're going to note down all the individual butterflies that you see of that species. You're going to write down the total number at the end of 30 minutes. And then if you see the second species, you know, note down, for example, how many lemon emigrants were there, how many crimson tips were there, how many lemon pansies were there, things like that. So you just keep noting down every single species and every single individual of the species. And then you just write your final number at the end of the 30 minutes and then immediately start the next count. So 9 to 9:30, 9:30 to 10, 10 to 10:30, and so on and so forth. So once you have written down all these things, you should definitely digitize these data properly, and then um, we'll compile it all together. Yeah, this is how it's going to work. Now, a few things that you should really take care of. One of the first things is that if you don't know a species, don't try to write some name. Yeah, if you don't know a species, if you know it's a pansy but you don't know which pansy it is, just say pansy species. Or if it's a crow and you saw it flying, so you know it was a crow, but you don't know whether it was a common crow or double branded crow or brown king crow or whatever it is, in which case you can just say crow species. So if you are in Bangalore, we know that when you say crow species, it's going to be any of the three crow species that occur in Bangalore. If you're in the Northeast and say blue crow species, then we know it's going to be one of those 5 or 6 species of blue crows that occur in the Northeast, right? So if you can identify things only up to a genus level, just write it at the genus level. Bush browns, you can't identify bush browns, most of them at least in the field, uh, from this common bush brown, dark brand bush brown group. For a lot of other species, it's possible. But otherwise, this particular group with 3-4 species, you can't really tell. So then just write bush brown species. If you can't distinguish between common evening brown, dark evening brown, just write evening brown species. But then make it known that when you say evening brown, it's not that you meant to write common evening brown, but you wrote evening brown because you were in a rush. And then 2 years later, or people who are analyzing your data may wonder whether that evening brown means you don't know that it was a common evening brown or dark evening brown, and therefore it's just evening brown species, or it was common evening brown, you knew it, but you didn't specify it. So write full names, don't do short forms, that will just get you in trouble in the long term. Write full names. If you don't know exact species name, write evening brown species, bush brown species, crow species, and so on, so that it's clear to anybody looking at the data that you do not have a species level identification, you only have a genus level identification. This is really important for data quality. This is really important. The second thing that you should really remember is um, don't linger in an area for too long if there are not too many butterflies around, because again, some butterflies may be going back and forth and you might count them multiple times. uh, but again, you also don't have to be paranoid about it. You have to understand that butterflies are not playing with you. They're not going to say that I'm going to go back and forth over the transect line or over your path so that you're going to count them multiple times. One simple assumption that we have to work with in this case is that you're going to say that butterflies are generally flying around, but they're going to fly only in one direction and they're not going to come back, so that I'll count them again in 5 minutes without realizing that you're counting the same butterfly. So we have to live with a few assumptions. These are just standard things in any count method, actually. Even on a transect line, if an animal is going to want to fool you, they can just circle you, right? So you'll perhaps count them when they're right in front of you, and then after some time when they're on the side. So this sort of things can happen with any method. So don't be psyched about it, but do make sure that you're not lingering in any area for too long. So don't do butterfly counts when if you're breaking out for lunch. Stop your count and then start counting when you're on the move. Because when you're, let's say, eating lunch or taking a picture, ideally somebody else should continue with the count, and people who are taking pictures should just stay back and take pictures there. Otherwise, again, as I mentioned, if a butterfly is lingering around a flower patch, you may not realize, because you're not actively looking at that butterfly. You may not realize that that butterfly is lingering around, and you might count it multiple times. Whereas if you're actively looking around and noting down butterflies, you're not going to make that mistake easily, or at least the chances of making that mistake are much smaller. So keep moving at some steady pace, but if you have a big swarm, such as at a mud puddling spot, at that point, you should definitely put down your bag and then just go around that patch, counting all the butterflies which are in that patch, and then note them down one by one before you start moving on. And that may take you half an hour, that may take you an hour or more, but then at least you will know that you're counting all these multiple species and many, potentially hundreds of individuals that you're seeing. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, beyond 5 or 10 or 15, it becomes really difficult to take precise number. If there's a mud puddling patch, for example, and butterflies are constantly flying in and out, it will be impossible for you to know precisely how many individuals there are. There may be 10, there may be 20. You can't even be sure beyond a certain number. But it's okay. You don't have to know exactly whether there were 10 or 12. The whole world is not going to shatter if you write down a wrong number within some range. Yeah. So typically what I do is, beyond 5 or 10, especially if the butterflies are moving and you can't really count them, you just make your best estimate. So you will see in my notebook something written as minimum of 10 individuals or 10 plus individuals. So how many were there? Can't really tell, but there were a minimum of 10, I'm sure of that. And 10 is a good number. Yeah, when you're counting butterflies, you're typically seeing only one or two individuals of any species at a time. So if you're seeing 10 individuals of a species in one spot, that's a good number. Beyond 2030, it's impossible to estimate numbers if butterflies are moving. So there you can just say 30 plus, 50 plus, or if you know there were 50 and 100 butterflies, then note that down. When we are analyzing data, in all likelihood, we'll take the low number of what you have recorded, but at least it won't be too out of place then in terms of what you might see there. So there are these things that you should keep in mind when you're taking counts. Oh, there's one more. If you're taking a particular path and taking the same path back, don't count butterflies on the way back, because again, you might be counting the same butterflies again on the way back. But it's actually going to be worse. Some of the butterflies you're counting are the same individuals that you saw earlier, and some individuals are going to be new. So it's actually even worse data than counting the same butterflies in some sense. So what we do is, typically, if you're going to walk back on the same path, we take counts only in one direction, either going forward or coming back. Yeah, we don't count butterflies on both in both directions. So what we do is, if you're taking counts when we are starting at a particular place and then going off into a distance and taking counts on the way back, I typically only write down if there are new species that I see or multiple individuals that I see. So let's say if I had seen only 2 anomalous nawabs when I was taking counts, and on the way back I see 5, then I will see that there were 5 anomalous nawabs on, let's say, a jungle cat scat or something like that. Yeah. So then we do know that even if in the counts there were only 2 individuals recorded, there were really 5 individuals in that area. Can we use the data? Not really in the 30-minute count framework. But if you have notable observations, if you have large numbers, if you have any other observations, it certainly helps to note those down. At least in notes, we can perhaps use them. And those get logged, those get archived. That is really important. Yeah. So count butterflies only in one direction. One smart strategy to employ, and that will in fact maximize the amount of data that you generate, is to do a loop. So start walking along a particular path, then switch over and then come out from somewhere else. And then you don't have to stop counting. Yeah. So see what is feasible, avoid double counting, but go to the field as frequently as possible in as many spots as possible and start counting. Yeah. So good luck with that. I will stop talking now and I will just take questions if you have any. In the chat box, I see that Vijay has submitted, included the link to Butterflies of India website, and especially the Butterflies of Bengaluru book. So you can go there and then download, not download, buy your copies there. Count forms are there, and we'll probably release a more detailed form sometime soon. And then just start doing work. Yeah, there's one more thing. We actually forgot to tell you this in the beginning. Tomorrow's count is actually going to start at 10:30, not at 8, which is the time mentioned in the poster and earlier post. So we looked at the weather forecast and we realized that 8 is going to be too cold. Temperature in Bangalore is going to be 21, 22 at that time. So very few butterflies will be active. So that demonstration of how to take 30-minute counts is going to be at 10:30 rather than 10. The link will be the same, but just make it at 10:30. Yeah, so I'll see you there. And if you have any questions that you want to ask me in the field, we can do that after the count is over. But I'll now take questions if you have any. Yeah. Again, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope that there are 32 participants right now. I think at some point there were 37, 38, and I hope there are many more on YouTube. So if you have any questions, Vijay and Arko and any other host, can you please compile all the questions, consolidate questions, and then start asking them rather than letting everybody ask questions?
Krushnamegh, just one question came up right now.
Okay.
So that's, could you please tell us what's happening inside a pupa? Asked by Jyotika Biju.
Okay. So good question. I'm not going to answer it right now because NatureMeds and I Found Butterflies and NCBS is going to organize a program as part of BBM sometime maybe next week. And I think Namrata will confirm this. But there's going to be a separate program to talk about butterfly biology. So again, that will actually be more interesting because that's going to be a question answer format right from the beginning. So I'll talk about a few things related to biology of butterflies, but it's really going to be you come up with questions and I will answer them. I and my students will answer them. So all these questions related to biology, I will hold on to until next Saturday. Today, I will like to answer questions very sharply focused on counting butterflies and monitoring butterflies, or any other kind of systematic sampling of butterflies.
So there is one question from Radhika.
Okay.
Asking if we can involve students from Hyderabad in this counting.
Absolutely, we can involve students or anybody else in any counts. Again, let me know if you want to do this long term. If it's short term for this month, anyway, the form is out and there is enough information out there on how to do it, where to submit count data and so on. So don't worry about it. But if you do want to do it long term, definitely get in touch, and Vijay and I can talk to you about this. Just drop us an email. I will just give you my email address in the chat box, and we will also put it up elsewhere. So you can just drop an email and we can connect. And Hyderabad is actually interesting. I'm going to come to Hyderabad probably within the next couple of months, and we can have a biodiversity marathon there. I can show you how to count butterflies, how to contribute to our website, Butterflies of India, and I can generally work with naturalists in Hyderabad, and lots and lots of them, and I will really like to meet you. So let's do that, but let's do it when the time comes. Right now, we can at least start talking about how we want to do this, where we want to do this, how many students we want to do this. If your group is big, then I would certainly want you to do it in multiple places rather than 30 people going to the same place. Yeah. So definitely spread out as much as possible, but don't spread out too much that you can't really collect data in the long term. Ideally, you should identify areas where you can go frequently every 2 weeks and count butterflies. Yeah, so Hyderabad, absolutely connect with me. I'm going to just confirm my email address here, krushnamegh@ncbs.res.in, and I found butterflies.org. Fine, copy my email addresses from the chat box and then drop me an email about this. But Hyderabad, actually, I will say every major city, and in fact, most big towns should have a group which is monitoring butterflies and birds and dragonflies and watching trees. Their nature clubs start doing something more systematically, something that will build the scientific understanding of our species, and not just, don't make it just pleasure. It should be a lot of fun, but it should also be something that builds towards a framework which is going to be really important in not only understanding our butterflies, but also helping conserve them. So please do that. All right, there's a question from, I think it was.
I can read one. So next question from Sumit. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm putting my daily butterflies data in iPhone butterflies from almost same area near my home. Is it useful since you mentioned that it may be repetitive? So daily data, not a problem, especially when there is a long-term data set. We are more likely to take averages over time. There are various ways of dealing with this. Not that we can't really use those data, but what I will say is, if you're counting, say, butterflies every day, then there is no point in doing that in the same area. So instead of doing it in a single place every day or too frequently, find 2 or 3 spots. Maybe take a park in your city. Maybe take a nearby hill or a nearby forest or a nearby lake and count butterflies there. So instead of doing it multiple times too frequently in one place, do it at 2-week interval in 4 places or 5 places. So that is something I would definitely recommend. Your existing data is not completely gone to waste. There are just some restrictions. We can't use it as independent data. That is what I will say. So what you have counted today in the same place is going to have an overlap with what you count tomorrow and what you're going to count day after tomorrow. So 2-week is the best. For more frequent data collection, we'll have to do some statistical tricks to make sure that we are not doing pseudo replication, counting the same thing multiple times. That is what it means, pseudo replication. Yeah. So it's not really 5 counts. It may still be 1 count if you're doing it in the same place on successive days. All right.
Related question from Ashwin is, how often do we go to a place repeatedly or go to new places? How to balance this?
Okay. Very difficult choice. If you're going to do this every 2 weeks in one place, I think it's best if you just do it in one place, because then for that one day, every alternate week or weekend, you will have a pretty good amount of data, let's say 8 30-minute counts without breaks for a long time. So if you want to see what is the effect of temperature, humidity, rainfall on seasonal population fluctuations in butterflies, it's best to do it in one single place. If you, on the other hand, want to, let's say, capture diversity as widely as possible, then don't go to the same place too many times in the same season, especially. Then it helps to go to multiple places and then go there only once or twice in a season and then spread out your effort much more. So it really depends on what you want to achieve. If it's understanding of population dynamics so that you can, let's say, track effect of climate change or habitat alterations for that matter on butterfly population biology, then doing it in few spots but with a pretty good frequency is better. If you want to, let's say, help state forest department in your area with a butterfly survey, then it's best that you go to a particular place only 2-3 times and then take these counts in as many places as possible. Now, of course, if you keep going to the same place every single day until you have seen all the species in that area, you are likely to see something interesting, something rare in that area, even something which has not been seen in your state or even in your country ever. So it's possible that you might find something new in that area if you keep going again and again. But there's in scientific research in ecology, we always look at how much effort you put in and how much data you're going to get. And there's going to be some saturation at some point. So as you begin your effort, the first few counts are going to be really, really productive. Every single count, you're going to see lots and lots of new species. Yeah. But if you keep on doing those counts in the same place in the same seasons, at some level, your effort is going to still keep on increasing linearly. But the number of species that you keep on capturing in these 30-minute counts is going to start flattening out. Yeah, so we say that with respect to the amount of effort put in, the amount of usable data or novel data that you can get is going to start saturating at some point, right? Beyond that, there's no point in collecting more data because you're not going to find anything new beyond that time. So for surveys, typically spreading out more with just 2 or 3 or 4 visits is typically good. Beyond that, people who go to that area more frequently should continue to do these, but then they will be doing the more seasonal population dynamics kind of data, which is also good. So both these are equally good. Why you would do them, the reasons behind them are completely different. So according to what you want to do, you do this. Given that people generally want to go to new areas, new habitats, and watch and photograph new species, I think going to different areas is something that eventually everybody is going to do. Very few people keep going to the same place, observing same species of butterflies over and over and over again. So that kind of data are much more rare in India. So what I would say is, if you're okay with doing either of these two things, count in the same area again and again every 2 weeks for many years. In the long term, that is going to be a rarer kind of data and a more important kind of data, especially for conservation purposes. That's my general advice.
Netra is asking any plan to come to Konkan.
You invite me and I'll come.
Okay, next
I will
question
say
from
this. I will say this right now. I'm trying to finish a butterfly book. It's going to be a fantastic book. It's going to be a unique design. You have not seen a butterfly book like this in India and probably nowhere else in the world. It is going to have a lot of information, but it's still going to be handy enough and easy enough for anybody to use. So I'm trying to finish that by next month, and it will be published soon after that. After that book is done, I really want to travel all over India and meet people, start people off on these 30-minute counts, and also get them organized into more local groups, which will not only count butterflies, but also do more serious things, whether it's early stages, whether it's creating habitats for butterflies, various themes that you will keep on hearing about during this month. but also more scientific things that, let's say, kind of what my lab does, whether it's on migration, whether it's on larval caterpillar, larval ant interactions, or whether it's going to be citizen science projects, it's going to be conservation projects, setting up things for the forest department, setting up butterfly gardens, you name it. We really would like to build up towards all these things, which is going to have big impact on two areas. One is research, and the other one is conservation. And of course, if anybody wants to use this for educational activities, well and good. But I think there are lots of people who can help with educational activities. I think what's his name? Sprouts gave a talk 2 3 days ago, right? That's the kind of work which engages a lot of people. And I think Sohail and Arjun and Vijay and others are giving talks in that area. But we really want to build up this scientific base of what we know about our species. And that is really what I would like to encourage with this particular book. So I would like to come to Konkan. I'll most likely come there in November, December. So at that time, please catch me. I will also give you my phone number in the chat box, 9483525925. Drop me a message whenever you're taking up something, or if you have questions, and I will get back to you, and I will be happy to help you with that as well.
Okay, next question is from Dr. Amir. He's asking what percentage of error do pollard walk method have?
I don't know whether we should have that conversation in this particular group, because calculating error is really difficult. For calculating error, actually, I will ask you, what do you mean by error? So whoever asked this question, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Give me these details. What do you mean by error rate? Do you mean species identification? Do you mean individuals that you're counting, how many you might have missed, how many you might have double counted and things like that? Or do you mean something else?
I think Dr. Amir has dropped off the call.
Okay, all right, fine. So as I just mentioned, there are basically various ways to look at error. And depending on which error you're talking about, you can potentially correct for some of those things from your count data, and some errors you cannot correct for. So if there's a identification error, if you haven't taken a picture, you're not going to know. If you want to look at error in counting, for example, if you are counting butterflies at any distance that you see during 30-minute counts, which is what we do, then it's very likely that you won't miss a bird wing which is 30 meters away, whereas you might miss a pansy or a bush brown which is hardly 2 meters away, right? So the distance, the conspicuousness of the species, activity of the butterfly, time at which you are taking these counts, all these things matter to missing species and missing individuals. And that error is not easy to calculate. It's not trivial as a scientific method as well as statistical analysis. It is not a trivial thing to correct for that error, or even to estimate it reliably. Even making reliable estimates of the error is extremely hard, even for large mammals, which is what people have been counting for a long time. Estimating error is a pretty serious business. So let's not get into the details of it, but you have to think of ways to minimize it. What I've described minimizes several kinds of errors, not other kinds of errors. So if we write a paper, we have to, in materials and methods, we have to describe the method very well, say that these are the things which we understand are potential sources of error. So all our results should be seen in that particular light. Now, the good thing is that detection is something that's going to differ between different species, different habitats. What you can see in an evergreen forest at a meter or 2 meters away from you is going to be very different from what you will see in a grassland. So people understand that habitat heterogeneity is an issue, other things are an issue. But the beauty of counting and doing surveys in the same place at a certain frequency, such as 2 weeks, is that these things are not going to change between different habitats in different seasons. So even if you say that evergreen forest, you're going to miss a lot more butterflies because of vegetation, you're not going to miss them differently in different seasons. You're likely to miss them similarly in different seasons. And you don't compare population dynamics of butterflies in evergreen forests with population dynamics in grasslands. This is another beauty of this 30-minute count compared to, let's say, regular pollard walks or other kinds of transect methods, where if you are defining your area already, you cannot cover the same area in evergreen forest versus grassland in the same amount of time, in which case your data more or less become impossible to compare. Whereas if you're taking counts across different seasons in the same area or in the same kind of habitats, then you can say whether summer had more butterflies, let's say, compared to monsoon versus any part of winter. And then you can compare whether those numbers are fluctuating differently in different years. And these long-term numbers fluctuating will tell you whether the butterfly numbers are going up and down. So you're not really comparing across habitats, you're comparing across seasons in the same habitat. So you're not really going to worry about habitat heterogeneity or other things if you have been counting enough number of times in enough places. So a lot of errors can be minimized as long as you understand what those errors are and not draw inferences which are going to lead you to a wrong conclusion. It's fine. But if you want to discuss this a lot more, because if you're going to do this, let's say, for the next few years, then definitely get in touch with me. We need to talk. I will explain exactly what are the things you should watch out for. And then, of course, we'll also discuss how to analyze the data. All right. There's
Dr. Amir, this was for you. I think you dropped off in between and returned. So Krushnamegh really took long time to explain this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much you could.
Okay. I just had some emergency call from my hospital.
okay.
Yeah. Thanks anyway.
Sure,
Thanks.
but I've answered your question on in this chat, so you can go back to the video at this
Okay,
time and see what
Right,
what
sir,
the
right.
answer was. Yeah, Shubhangi, I can't say a full name, has asked, how do I analyze species distribution data over time? Again, a fairly involved question. I really like to answer it, but I will have to basically give you a crash course on kind of data and various ways to analyze and plot this. So maybe let's keep it on hold. Perhaps at a later time when we have 2-3 years of data, at that time, perhaps we can talk about this. Let's focus on the method today and conceptual understanding of the method. And if there are any questions that you want to ask which have a direct bearing on your counts this month, then we'll prioritize those. And questions like how to analyze species distribution data, those we should really take up when we have slightly more data, but let's wait for that. But that's a big scientific question and that requires a very serious answer. I'm sorry that I won't be able to answer it right now, but I would like to answer it in a couple more years. Vijay or Arko, do you have you found any other papers? I mean, other questions that you want to ask me?
No, I think we have answered all. There was one question about iPhone Butterflies app. So
I was just looking at that. RK Datta and perhaps other people have asked, unable to find app for iPhone Butterflies. There is no app for iPhone Butterflies right now. We will launch it hopefully in the next 2 or 3 months is scheduled time. But in India, everything gets constructed slowly. So expect perhaps 3 or 4 months, but it's actively being constructed. We have very good design and that will help you with 30-minute counts. So just hold on to it for now, but keep doing counts. And as long as you're entering all the data in the prescribed format that we have, all those data can be brought into the app format or in our electronic format and analyzed properly. So don't worry about it. But for the app, wait a little bit longer. An app actually is going to be fantastic. It will be a very beautiful field guide that you can use in the field. So look out for it. Also keep tuned into Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp groups, you will hear about the app being released when we get to that stage.
I think that is all for the time being. I don't see any other questions.
It's also 1.5 hours since we started, or we're supposed
Yes.
to have started, so maybe let's stop. And again, thanks everybody for asking interesting questions, for being here. Clearly you're motivated. I hope that you will use this motivation really well and start something in your area. I would really, really love that. And if you do start something or want to start something, please get in touch with me. As I mentioned, I've given my email addresses and phone numbers. Do drop me a message and let's connect. Bye.
Thank you so much, and hope we get many more people counting butterflies soon.
Great. Oh, before I actually log off, thanks Vijay, Arko, Namrata, and everybody else for coordinating this. It takes something to invest time in doing all these things, and we appreciate that you're doing this, and we have taken up this responsibility for the whole month. So big thanks for that. Okay, bye.
Bye.